I can understand the frustration and anger. Livelihoods are at stake. Our fishery is at stake. But we are at crisis point with the queenie stock. And the science is pretty solid. But to back that up, because there is some disbelief in the industry, and I am aware of that, we have funded an industry survey that is taking place now, or has taken place over the last few days before the season starts. So the industry has been enabled to go out there and do their own sampling under supervision. And we will start the season on the 1st of July, but I've undertaken to review the situation in 4 weeks' time. And should this survey throw up stock that we are unaware of, then we will review the situation at that point.
From what you were saying before, it sounds like there's been a slight disconnect between the announcement that's been made to them a week ago and what they've sort of been hearing. It seems that it's come as a shock to them. I mean, do you think you've told them with enough time?
Well, we had to get our surveys complete, but we work with the Scallop Management Board, which is independent of DEFA, has an independent chair. There are representatives from all the jurisdictions, fishermen and processors on that board. And they review the data that Bangor produce for us, and they come back with their recommendations. Well, I review with the fisheries team. It's not just me that makes this decision. It's heartfelt and in depth when we look at these things, and I was really disappointed when the survey came back this year. So that sort of went backwards and forwards to the board, and finally we made our recommendations, or I made the recommendations based on the advice I had, and let the board know, and then we promulgate them to the industry. But until we have all the results and it's gone through the board process, we can't announce a decision. They are going to fish on the 1st of July, and the question was, for how much would they be fishing? And the biomass is at its lowest level since records began, substantially below since records began. If I take us back to 2011, there were tens of thousands of tons of biomass, or queenies, on the seabed, as it were. We're talking about just over 1,000 tons this year.
Is that a yearly basis, though, that it should be looked at? Because it seems to be that in the past people recall there being times like these regularly.
Well, since our records began in 1993, there's never been a situation like this.
He's recalling back to the 50s, 60s.
Yes, that would have been more anecdotal then, and I can't disagree. He obviously has been in the industry for a long time, but there would be no science attached to that, and I suspect it was self-limiting in times a long time ago, in as much that we have more sophisticated vessels now. We have to cooperate with other jurisdictions who have access, and there is more effort generally if we don't control it. I mean, I don't know how many boats were fishing in those days and how big they were and how many dredges they carried, so I can't make a valid assessment.
One of the aspects of Stan's interview was a fairly dismissive attitude towards the science and the politics behind these decisions. Do you think you should be doing more to make them feel like they're included in this decision making?
Well, I'm sad that he feels that we don't include the fishermen in that decision-making process. We have the independent board, which is the industry representation. They have their own producers' organisation who we communicate with and work with quite closely. And last week we held a fisheries conference to which all fishermen were invited, and the science was there for everyone. I opened the conference and the scientists were there, available for questioning. So,
but again, that's a week before the season starts. You can see why that might not be convenient for everybody.
I think you're probably right. But as I said earlier, collating the data and having that data available is not necessarily easy to do. In fact, it's impossible to do 3 or 4 months before the event. We need to know what the current situation is when the season starts. So, yes, I'll take it on board, and we will try and be more communicative. But I'm sorry that we appear to be on the wrong side of this in terms of communication.
Well, what can you do to improve that relationship, the divide that appears to be there?
Well, I think we can certainly. David Beard, who is head of the Producers Association in Peel, we do speak to him. He knows he's on the Scallop board. I could turn around and say he should communicate with his members more, but I'm not going to say that. I think it's beholden upon us all to communicate the message. I think it's been fairly obvious for 2 or 3 weeks where we were going with this, and I made a decision, I think about 2.5 weeks ago, with the Fisheries Directorate as to where we were going to go with the present TAC following the recommendations from the Scallop Board. And I'm sorry that it is short notice, as it were, but the season will start. It'll be interesting to see what sort of catches come out. I believe the science is right. It's fairly robust. Bangor are very well versed in producing these surveys, and I have no reason to doubt the science at all.
Obviously the fishermen have a vested interest in this, but how do they respond to the need for conservation?
Well, it's difficult. If I was a fisherman and I want to earn a living, I want to catch as many queen scallops or king scallops or whatever I'm fishing as I can. But I think most fishermen understand that there needs to be a limit, or we'll have a free-for-all. When I first became minister, I had a very difficult decision to make as to imposing bag limits on scallop fishing, because we had a sort of race to fish 3 years ago, and we had to stop that. And since then we've been very careful, working with industry through the Scallop Board, to make sure we amalgamated the Queen and King Scallop Board, so it's a Scallop Board now, so that they are able to review and give advice to the industry, as well as work with the Producers Association and ourselves, so that people are aware of what's going on. The Scallop Board, and I reaffirm this, is independent of us. We have no direction in that board. This year they are aware of the situation. They recommended a 20% reduction, but when we reviewed the figures, that would have caught over 50% of the available biomass, and the information we had from Bangor was that would have taken the biomass at the stock level below its critical point, where simply it would be very difficult to regenerate.
Well, we're talking 40% then. That number, what's the economic cost of that?
Well, it's going to be big, because every year there's been a reduction. At the moment, they can go out and catch the same bag limit as they did last year, but with the amount of stock available, they're going to use that up fairly quickly if they catch a lot. We will review it in 4 weeks, but I'm not that optimistic that the industry survey is going to turn up anything new. We've done the science, Bangor have done the science, and I think it's going to be correct, sadly.
What about job losses then? I think it's 28 boats that are specific for this kind of fishing that would be affected. How many per boat? Have you worked out how many people may be out of a job?
We haven't precisely. Some people work part-time. There are skippers that work for owners, so it's a difficult one to assess. But yes, if the season is as poor as we think it's going to be, and looking forward, it doesn't look very optimistic, there will undoubtedly be some difficulties. We are looking at the situation in terms of making substantial grants available for diversification, but I also understand the problems there with quota and what's available. We are looking actively at how we can acquire quota, or work with the Producers Association to acquire quota, and there are some non-quota species that can be caught.
I think in some of the other interviews we've heard as well, there has been this sort of stressing that, you can't just move from one kind of fishing to another. They are very, very different. Are you going to be offering anything in the way of retraining or help in that regard?
Well, the grants address gear change, which is what you're talking about. You have to sort of re-equip your boat for different types of fishing. I think in terms of training, I'm not aware that we would need to retrain the people. But yes, there's a
or
a
training
learning
in
curve
something
there.
else, perhaps.
Well, I think that's something for the future. Let's see what happens. We've just finished the king scallop season. There was a reasonable season there, but they didn't reach the total allowable catch. Sadly, that sat with the science that we had at the beginning of the season. This season, we'll see how the queenies go. I hope that some of the boats will be able to diversify. There is a big prawn fishery in our territorial sea, which we're not exploiting at the moment, but it's difficult with quota.
Is that something you'd want to encourage then?
Yes, we would like to see diversification. If you look at what's happened in the past, we've now got quite a substantial whelk fishery, which we're now policing and controlling, and that was not there. There were some whelks caught, but it's developed substantially over the last few years.
And when you do encourage that kind of diversification, whether it's with prawns or whelks, would you be looking at it with a slightly different head? And now knowing what the situation's like with queenies, would you be looking at it with a more conservative head?
Well, I think in all fisheries, the science is developing all the time. We know that in the Pan-Irish Sea, queen scallops and king scallops have been overexploited. All the jurisdictions know this, but it's getting everyone together. We have a fisheries management agreement, and we work through that, and that allows access from other jurisdictions into our waters and vice versa. At the moment, it seems to be more of a one-way street into our water, but that's that's another story. It may not be that way forever, and we have to be aware of that. And we are looking at the FMA and renegotiation in due course. But it would be nice if we could cooperate on a pan-Irish Sea basis, so that we have proper closed areas where we know spawning's taking place, and we cooperate on fisheries closing, size limits and things like that. But at the moment, we're not there. We're working hard on that. We have the science, and I would say that we've got probably some of the best research and science in the UK at the moment. And but that needs to translate to the other fisheries as well.
Just finally, because I've already kept you quite long, if you were to be offered an invitation to come aboard a fishing vessel in Peel, say, would you take it up?
Yeah, I'd be quite happy to go on board. I have been fishing, and I used to do a lot of sea fishing many years ago. And I know it's not the same as commercial fishing, but I have been on boats when they pulled lobster pots and crabs, for instance. Yeah, I would be happy to go on a boat and see what happens.
And talk to them, of course.
And talk to the fishermen and see what their problems are. But it doesn't change the fact that there's only a limited amount of stock available, and sadly we can't change that. And I know it's difficult and frustrating for the fishermen that there is this limited amount of stock available, but it's been declining for some time, and sadly it doesn't look as though there's going to be a change this year.